Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay. There was some fun stuff going on with browsers and sharing screens, but that seems to have been resolved. Good afternoon again. Welcome to the webinar. This is actually the second time I do a very similar webinar. We did one a couple of weeks ago on the sign and display market. Today, we're going to talk about pdfToolbox for commercial and digital prints. And you could say, isn't that a repeat of what we did last time? Well, it is and it isn't, obviously. There are a number of functionalities within pdfToolbox that are applicable for every market segment that we have. But at the same time, there are certainly capabilities in pdfToolbox that are very different between different market segments. If you're producing large format print, then you might be very interested in working with cut contours and stuff like that, irregular shapes. That is maybe not so common in commercial and digital print. And on the other hand, in this market that we're now talking about, you're going to run into issues with multi-page documents much more, and standard document formats and all kinds of Imposition that you probably don't have in other market segments. So it makes sense to look at specifically for this market segment, what is it that you can do with pdfToolbox? We're going to try and do that in 45 minutes so that with questions included, we end up at about an hour. There is a questions box that you can use to enter your questions, and we will come back to them probably at the end of this webinar. Probably, I mean, as in, we're not going to interrupt after every topic to ask questions, but we'll gather them together at the end of the webinar. So let's look at pdfToolbox. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing presentation. I would prefer to do technology demos using the product itself if you want, but I want to go over two or three slides to position things here. So we're talking about pdfToolbox. As I think all of you know, I looked at the list of attendees for this webinar. As I think all of you know, this is PDF technology. You can use it to inspect PDF files, so do Preflight, and you can use it to correct PDF files. And a lot more, actually. What we see more and more is that people use it to generate what you could call administrative documents that are necessary throughout production flow, maybe even use it to generate shipment documents and so on. It is one technology, pdfToolbox, but it can be implemented in a lot of different ways. And what you see on this slide is the solutions from manual with pdfToolbox desktop to hot folder with pdfToolbox server over a command line tool with CLI, and then software development kits, pdfToolbox SDK, that you can use to integrate it into a larger application. And my very nice icons underneath show that it runs just about anywhere, whether it's Mac, Windows, or most versions of Linux. It doesn't really matter. pdfToolbox isn't very difficult when it comes to what do you need in a machine to be able to run it. So it's pretty flexible in that sense. And then these are the topics that we're going to talk about. I'm going to introduce them very, very briefly in presentation each time, and then I'm going to switch to software so that I can show you some things. And it will only be the tip of the iceberg. Right? I mean, I can show some of the examples and the things that we have done, but it is always the tip of the iceberg. In reality, there is a lot more that can be done. But the 6 big topics that we're going to cover today are Preflight and then color. I think those two will be relatively short. I want to spend a little bit more time showing a number of different applications for place content. We want to spend some time on Imposition, and then you have page-related issues, page size-related issues, and bleed, which is always a hot topic. And then I want to add with showing you one or two examples of proofing. And with proofing, I mean the creation of proof sheets, not necessarily color accurate proofing or content proofing. There are other tools that focus on that, but proofing in the sense of creating a proof sheet that combines usually a preview of the file with a bunch of metadata about the file, so that you don't have to do that in Illustrator or in InDesign for each job. So I'm actually going out of my presentation a little bit early here, so let's go back to that for a sec. Let's start with Preflight. Preflight, as you know, is the concept where you check a file for example, production readiness, but it could just as well be checking the file against the parameters for the incoming job, the incoming order. If someone orders an A4 document, it is important to check that the PDF that they deliver is actually A4. If it's A5, it may be you may be able to print it, which is normally what you check with Preflight. But if you print it, you would end up with an A5 document where the customer ordered in A4. So you want to be able to check those kinds of things as well. And pdfToolbox is very suitable for that as well. Let's start with production Preflight. And then what is important is summarized on this slide. Specifically, pdfToolbox has support for standards, and that is what in most cases is used either as is or as the basis of the Preflight profile that is being used. So if you want to use one of the ISO standards like PDFX1A or PDFX4, then that is obviously supported. If you want, and you should, if you want to use a Ghent Workgroup profile, then those obviously are supported as well. And in most cases, the profiles come in two versions. There is a version that does just checking, and there is a version that does checking and fixing. Or if you have a profile that does checking and fixing, pdfToolbox has a way to switch off any embedded fixes, so you just do verification. Should you do checking or checking and fixing? That's not for me to answer. That really is what the business requirements are in that particular case. Maybe also important, and perhaps not for a lot of you, but it does happen, and it happens a little bit more than it happened 5 years ago, is that there are also standards around the long-term archival of PDF documents, and there are standards around using PDF files in accessibility workflows. And pdfToolbox also has support for these standards. And then what I'm talking about is an ISO standard like PDFA for long-term archival, or PDFUA, which is the universal accessibility standard, also from ISO. So if you want to do Preflight so that you know that this file can be printed, and at the same time you also want to verify that it is going to be okay for long time archival, then that is something that pdfToolbox can do. And it can, in some cases, even produce PDF files that are compliant with PDFX for Preflight and PDFA for archival. So just know that that is possible. Once you've Preflighted, you end up with a Preflight report. And that Preflight report looks a certain way. You can see it here, an example at least, that has a preview, and then it has some generic information about the file that was Preflighted. But I can just as well make it look completely different. And if we're talking about business cards, for example, I could look at whether this is a single or double-sided business card and make a Preflight report that shows me not just the front of the card, but front and back of the card. And this is done not by modifying something in the Preflight profile. It is done by modifying the template that is used for the creation of the Preflight report. And that is an HTML-based template. And you have unlimited flexibility in how you want to set up that template and how the Preflight report as a result should look. If you are dealing with something where you also have special colors, for example, you could make it more creative than that. So really, when it comes to these Preflight reports, your creativity is essentially the limit. Now, in many cases, you want something that is much more boring, such as an XML file. And you might want an XML file because you want to automate the Preflight process. And you want to have an automated process, maybe a switch script, for example, to interpret that Preflight profile and get all the information out that is necessary, and then decide automatically what's going to happen with a file. So pdfToolbox can also generate an XML version of the report, and it can just as easily generate a JSON version of that report, which may be easier to implement or to work with in a modern environment such as Node.js. The product is not limited to either of these formats. You can combine them. So if I wanted to generate the PDF version of the report that you still see in the background on this slide, and at the same time I want an XML or a JSON report, then that is a possibility. Likewise, if I want to generate reports in multiple languages, that is also a possibility. And then the last point is that I already talked about what I typically call intent preflight, which means someone places an order, they specify certain requirements for that order, in this example, a width and height, probably in millimeter. Well, how do I verify that that width and height is correct? And in order to do so, pdfToolbox supports variables in its Preflight engine. And so in checks or in corrections, I can add these variables, and these will receive data from the outside. And that means if I run it in pdfToolbox desktop, it will pop up a dialog box, and I can enter the values for the width and height that I can use. And you'll see an example when I show some of the examples in my list. For the rest of this webinar, you'll see examples of that dialog popping up and asking me all kinds of information that is going to be used during Preflight, for example. So those are simple variables. They come from the outside. They come from this dialog box in pdfToolbox desktop. But if you're in an automated environment, they would typically automatically be funneled from the web shop, web to print, MIS, whatever system it is that has the data, the metadata on that job, into pdfToolbox. And then the Preflight that is done by pdfToolbox is done taking those variables into account. At the same time, I can also use JavaScript variables. And so if I wanted to calculate how many square meters of material this job represents, I could write a JavaScript variable and then do the calculation of width times height, and that would give me an answer to that. And then I can use that information somewhere in a Preflight check or in a correction or as part of a Preflight report or as part of something I add to the document, maybe in a proof sheet. So both of these things are supported. Calculated variables are calculated using JavaScript. There is a really fast and comprehensive JavaScript engine built into pdfToolbox that allows you to write your own custom variables. And that is a very, very flexible and powerful feature of the product. So I'm not going to show a lot of things about the Preflight part because I think that is something that well, most of you should know. I just wanted to show you a complete Preflight report, and so that you can see that it can have as many pages as you want. Again, this is generated using an HTML template, so you can adjust this exactly to what you want. In this example, I not only have a preview and some metadata, but I also have a page that shows all of the color separations in this job. I have an ink coverage preview that shows me where too much ink is being used on this page, and I have a preview of each separation. Again, all of these things are optional. You can use them, you can integrate them in your own pre-flight reports, but you don't have to use them. And good practice is typically to keep the pre-flight report as simple as you can and only include the information that your clients who are going to see these reports understand. And so if at some point you wanted to generate two different versions of a report, maybe one that is meant for a client and one that is meant for pre-press people in your shop, then you can do that as well. And you can generate them from the same pre-flight step in one go. So that is pretty straightforward. Okay, next bit is color. There is a very comprehensive color engine built into pdfToolbox. I will show you the ugliest slide you have ever seen in your life, but of course my intention was to show that you can take RGB colors like what you have on the bottom left of this slide and convert them to proper CMYK, which you have on the top right of this slide. And then pdfToolbox supports two different ways of doing so. It can, of course, use ICC profiles, but it can also use device link profiles. What is important is that pdfToolbox is not a profile creator. It cannot create either ICC profiles or device link profiles for you, but it can certainly use them. So if you have ICC profiles that come with the system or with an application, or that you get from another vendor like ColorLogic, for example, then those profiles can be used to do color conversions. If you have device link profiles that do a very specific conversion from one RGB color space to one CMYK color space, for example, then it can be used as well. And device link profiles can also be used in a scenario where you want to do tech reduction or device ink saving. The only thing, again, is you need the correct device link profile to do that. And in order to do so, you can look at device link profiles that are created by something like Cobra, for example, from ColorLogic, or that come from one of their device link packs. Next to, and this is again a shocking slide once you've gotten used to looking at the green I had on there. Next to that, pdfToolbox allows you to work with spot color, and with spot color there are a number of capabilities. So I could leave the name of the spot color intact, not change that, but convert the representative color, the alternative color as it is technically used, which is how that particular spot color is shown in the PDF. I could also, next to changing that alternate color, I can also change the name of the spot color. And this allows you to do things like taking in files that contain, I don't know, Pantone colors or some other color matching system and clean up the names, or maybe look for specific brand colors and rename them to something that you know exists in on your output device. So those kinds of conversions and name changes are also a possibility. And then what I can also do, and is done very often, is convert spot colors to CMYK or RGB or RGB so that they can be printed without any spot color present. And in all cases, that can be done selectively. I can look for spot colors with a certain name. I can look for all spot colors that have a certain word in them. I could look for things that contain white, for example, and then standardize them on the word white capitalized the way I want it and the way that my output device I know supports it. So you have quite a few capabilities there, and I wanted to go back to pdfToolbox for this, and then we're going to see if we can show you some things. I am not going to show the normal color conversions. I think you will all trust me when I say that I can convert RGB to CMYK, for example. And actually, if you ever want to try that out, just go to the switchboard and look at the color tab, and you have all of the combinations there that you can try. So convert to RGB, convert to black and white. I could do a conversion from an incoming Office file. I can do spot color stuff. I can do conversions to CMYK. So you can use the switchboard to play with this and experiment a little bit. What I want to show you is two special things. The first being a conversion to a 7-color space. So what I have here is a, I believe, CMYK. So let me see, which one do I want to show? This is just, yeah, so this is perfect. So no spot colors here. This is simply a CMYK document. And now, if I go here and I say analyze and fix, which is the way you would run profiles or process plans in pdfToolbox, it's going to give me a converted document. And if I now go back to my spot color separations, you can see that now I do have spot color. What it did, this uses a multi-channel device link profile actually that converts from CMYK, and it converts it to a CMYK green, orange, and violet space. And so you can see that these additional spot color layers were created by that process. Again, the profile was not created by pdfToolbox. The ICC profile that is used here is not created by pdfToolbox. pdfToolbox does have an engine to run ICC profiles and device link profiles. So that works very well. And then the second example that I wanted to just show you is something that also allows me to talk about automation. And so the goal of pdfToolbox from the very beginning has always been to help people work with PDF files in an automated fashion, in an as automated fashion as possible. And so in order to do so, all of the functionality that you find in the product is really geared towards making document-wide changes. And you saw a nice example before. It took a CMYK document and it converted the whole document to a 7-color space. That's a document-wide change. Let me run this while I'm talking. And so store in results again. There. And what you can see is that what I'm doing here is not a document-wide change. I've just taken a very gray mouse and I've changed it to a much nicer but very bright purple mouse. And I want to show this because while a lot of the focus always goes to these document-wide changes, there are certainly cases where you can build a Preflight profile or a process plan that looks for specific objects and that then does changes to these specific objects. In fact, that is how a lot of the fixes that pdfToolbox does for production files are actually done. You select, in a way, the objects that will cause a problem, and you fix only those objects. And so in this case, there is a search for a particular color gray in this profile, and then that gray is modified into purple. So it looks for specific objects and fixes those. And it's worthwhile understanding that pdfToolbox is pdfToolbox and focuses on automated processing. But at the same time, it is good to know that that automated processing can be very selective. Keep that in the back of your mind. I don't always mention that when I'm talking about automation because we have a tendency to focus on bigger automation tasks, but that is always a possibility in the product as well. Okay, so much for color. Let's look at the next object, which is certainly as interesting as color. Place content. And this is going to be a very, very short introduction to what place content is It is all explained on this slide. I call it a PDF file decorator, and that's exactly what it does. You give it a PDF file, and then I run a place content fix-up on it by itself or as part of a profile or a process plan. And the result is my input PDF with some things on top. And then the question is, what things can you put on top? Well, I told you that, or you should know that the Preflight reports are generated from an HTML template. Place content also uses HTML templates. It converts HTML into PDF, and that is used to decorate the PDF file. Now, that sounds very, very abstract, but this is a really nice one to show and explain because it can do some cool stuff. So let me show you some examples of what I mean. And I will already tell you that the last topic that I will talk about, which is the proofing, the creation of proof sheets, is actually also an application of place content, but typically in combination with the Imposition engine. We've seen this file before, but I'm not going to convert it to a different color space this time. What I'm going to tell you is that this is the cover of a book. So I have the outside cover and the inside cover, meaning 4 pages in total, front, outside, and inside, and then the last, so the back cover, inside and outside. And you can see that the third page here has a QR code on it. But what I'm missing here is on this second page, I'm missing an ISBN code. And so I've written a little process plan, and then when I run that, you'll see that it will add that ISBN code to the corner of page 2, and it leaves page 1 and then the other pages unaffected by that. So I still have the same content in this document, except that I now have an ISBN code. And of course, here I took an existing, well, a fixed example if you want. But of course, I could put a variable in there. And of course, that variable could come from outside of pdfToolbox. Meaning, if I link this into a production workflow, the ISBN code to use for the book could use from some kind of database or a job system that I have. And then it is fed into this Preflight profile, and it generates the ISBN code that I want. It is worth mentioning that the code, let me see if I can zoom in on that. It is worth mentioning that the code that is generated here is high quality, meaning this is not an image, it is not a, it's not a font that is used. These things are high quality vector elements, and that means that I can use advanced parameters like bar width reduction and so on, depending on the print technique that I'm going to be using. And I'll end up with something that is really crisp and clear. So that's one example of place content where I'm just adding a barcode. Now, what I can also do, of course, is add text. And I've made an example here where I have a file and the name of the file is this 16 job ID. That's just for me to understand what this is about. And then you can see let's say a job ID that comes in the file name. So this last number that you see is the job ID of this particular job. And if I run this now, and we'll store the results in that same folder. If we run this now, you'll see that it is going to extract that job ID from the file name, and it's going to add it in a corner of my document. This is to show two things. First of all, this job ID is, of course, text. And so I can not only add barcodes, I can also add text. In fact, I can add barcodes, text, images, line art elements, so vector elements, all of these things in any combination. It uses an HTML template. It's very, very flexible in the types of objects that I can add. But the second important thing is that this number is not an external variable. So in this case, it does not come from an external system. And what I did here was use a JavaScript variable, and that JavaScript variable extracts that job ID from the file name and then adds it onto my document. So why do we need JavaScript in a product like pdfToolbox? Well, to do cool things like this, where it looks at the name of an incoming job, or maybe XMP metadata that is in this file, or any other parameter that or information that it learns from the file. And then we use that in our processing. So that makes it for a very, very flexible way of using it. And now I have a dilemma because I can show you one more example, and then it is partly place content and it is partly imposition. I'm going to say that it is more in place content than imposition, so I'm going to show it to you here. This is obviously one of my sample files. And the idea here is that I want this to be printed as wallpaper on a wall in my house. That would not be completely impossible in my case. But of course, this is not printed in one big chunk. You need it to be printed in individual bands. And the question is, how do you go from this file that the customer delivers to these individual bands that are going to be printed? Well, let me show you. You run this process plan on it, and that is going to do a bunch of stuff, and it finally delivers this. And so I have multiple pages where each of the pages is a collection of, well, a collection. Each of the pages is one of these bands. Yeah? And what also happens, and let me see if I can show that in a way. Yes, I might want to zoom in a little bit more. There. What also happened is that this line that you see here is added as well, and then the name of the file has been added, and the number of the band in question has been added as well. Yeah. And again, this is important. It means that not only can I split this document up into individual parts, you can see a lot of pixelation here, but that's because I used a relatively low resolution image so that it doesn't take too much time and space. But what is important is I can cut it in bands. We use JavaScript to calculate how many bands we want to generate. And then it uses place content to add these additional marks, the line, the text, and the numbers, to add these additional marks so that the file is now ready not only for production, for printing, but also has marks on it for the assembly on the wall afterwards. And all of that is done with one process plan. So it's a sequence of steps that it goes through. You can see the sequence on the right here, and well, I can tell you that the green thing is imposition. We're going to talk about that in a second, about the imposition engine. But that's an imposition step. You have some other cleanup steps in here. You have add header and footer, which is place content, the technology that we are talking about. And then also, and necessary in this particular workflow, but that depends on the business rules again, every even page in this document, so page 2, 4, 6, and so on, has been rotated 180 degrees. So essentially upside down. And that is simply because that is what they needed in the production process. So also place content. Let me see if there is something else that I want to show you, and there was. And just to show you the flexibility of the place content engine and pdfToolbox in general, this is not something that you would want to do in a production flow. And let me just run this, and then I'll explain what happens here. As you saw, this is a file that has a number of images in it. And now I'm going to run the process plan. And what you see is that on each of these images, I get an overlay, and in that overlay, I get the resolution of that specific image. And in this case, of course, the file has been properly prepared, probably from InDesign or something like that. And so I get mostly 150 dpi, but there are some rounding things. So I end up with 150.1 or 0.2 or 0.0. And that also shows you that this is not just a mock-up. It really looks at these images and extracts the information. So what happens here? Well, there is a preflight step that detects all of the images and also detects the resolution of that image on the page. Then there is a little script, and then the majority of the work is done by a place content template that adds these text bits in the document on top of each of the images in my document. Just to show you how flexible that kind of engine can be. And it's really the combination of the fact that we have a Preflight engine here, we have JavaScript support to calculate things and interpret the results of Preflight, and then we place things on top of the file. So it's really the combination of all of these technologies together that makes it so incredibly versatile. The reason I show this and what I would like you to remember from this is that there is always a lot more that is possible than what you would probably assume from a tool like pdfToolbox. And if you have scenarios that need to be automated in workflows, then read the documentation, ask us whether something like this is possible and how it would be possible, and so on. Yeah, because there is always a lot more than is possible than what you probably initially think. Okay, imposition. Pretty sure you all know what imposition is. pdfToolbox has a capability of doing very simple impositions where it takes a business card, for example, and does a simple step and repeat. And in this case, I probably just asked it to generate a 3x6 grid. 3 columns, 6 rows, and some spacing in between my individual business cards, and then that's it. And you can certainly use it for those types of imposition, but you can also certainly use it for more complex things. Not so much done in this particular market segment, but for example, the tiling capabilities that you see that are part of pdfToolbox also use the imposition engine. And in fact, the example I showed before with the wallpaper uses the imposition engine to cut up the file into different pieces. Yeah. So the wallpaper example is a combination of an imposition step and then a place content step. And so the imposition engine in pdfToolbox, and I think that is the important thing to realize and to remember, is that the imposition engine can be used for very simple stuff, but it can also be used for things that you maybe don't think would be imposition necessarily. So I have always too many examples to show something, but let me still show you this one. So store that in results. There we go. Very similar to what I just shown you. This is a fixed imposition template that always does 3 columns and then a bunch of rows. And then it also adds, and this is again done with the place content functionality, it adds a cutting mark, an alignment mark at the bottom of the document. Yeah. But the imposition configuration here is still a relatively simple one, a stupid one, if you want. Let me show you one that is a little bit more intelligent. Here I have another cute animal, and I'm going to run this and show you what happens. There's 2 things that you could see here. First of all, that this was really fast. Yeah. So imposition configurations, when you have to make imposition configurations to do exactly what you want, and those can be done with an older scripting language or with JavaScript. You have both systems in pdfToolbox, but running an imposition is really, really fast. And in this case, so the second point is that this imposition is smart. I've asked it to always generate a landscape A4 document and then to output as many labels as possible. And whether it's labels or business cards or whatever, or A4 documents on a larger sheet, it doesn't really matter. I've done the calculation here automatically. And so the spacing that I have in between and the number of columns and rows is calculated on the fly by this imposition configuration. And then the text at the bottom, in this case, is also added by the imposition engine. The imposition engine can add text like it does here, but it is also limited to text. So if I wanted to add more complex things, maybe I also want a little EAN barcode somewhere in the corner, then that would again be the place content engine. And I don't think I mentioned this, but I've shown you an example of an ISBN code that was added. I now say EAN code, but just about any barcode is supported. There is a barcode engine embedded in pdfToolbox that supports more than 100 different barcodes of barcode types. And then it also has a bunch of variants, advanced variants for each of these barcode types. So essentially anything that you could come across in production, there is probably a way to generate that with pdfToolbox. So that is also an example of the imposition engine. And let me end this by showing you this. This is a brochure. First page is a single page, but then I have spreads and the rest of the brochure. And then I believe the last page is again a single page. Well, I could use another feature of the imposition engine, which is splitting up pages where necessary. And so I'm just going to run that. And that is going to give me the same brochure, but now in a single page variant. And now, of course, I could do a booklet imposition or any type of imposition that I want to do from there. So there are some of those capabilities as well. 2 more to go. Next topic is pages and bleed. And so the idea there is that I can do things to pages and page sizes. I can rotate pages. You've already seen that in the wallpaper example, but I can also scale pages, and I could go from an A4 to an A5, for example, or maybe scale while squishing the content, as you can see on the right. And then you could say, yeah, but you never want to do that. Of course you do. In some cases, you want to scale a document in one direction by 102%, for example, to compensate for stretching or shrinking of the material that is going to be printed on. And pdfToolbox allows you to do that if that is what you need. You can also fix boxes. So if I have something that comes out of Word or, heaven forbid, PowerPoint or Excel, and that needs to be printed, then it is probably not going to have a correct trim box and bleed box and so on. And pdfToolbox allows you to set these things correct. So in this case, it inserted a correct trim box. It then added a bleed box and trim marks and a media box where it needed to be for the rest of the production workflow. And there are a lot of things that you can do in terms of multi-page documents. And you see an example here of a book. I have cover pages at the beginning and the end, and then I have the inside pages. When I want to print this, I actually, in this example, want the front and back cover together in one document, and then the inside book block in another document. And my cover could also be 4 pages, as in the file we used before. It doesn't really matter. I can set something up in pdfToolbox that does this splitting of files based on certain rules. I can also change the order of pages, maybe reverse page order and things like that. All of those things are supported. And so if I wanted to show an example of that, So let me take this one. We know this file by now. This is the same file as we've used before, but this time I'm going to do an imposition of a cover with spine. So essentially, let me run this. Yeah, and what I said when I started this webinar is pdfToolbox supports variables, and if you run something with variables in the desktop version, it might pop up this dialog box where you can have a value for each of these variables. Well, in this case, I can add the spine thickness in millimeter as a variable, and by default it's 5. I could change that to something else, and then my process plan that I run on this will take that number that I added into account. And so what it now does is it creates an imposition that is nicely centered on a larger sheet. I have the outside cover pages and I have the inside cover pages. And the spine thickness here was set to 5 millimeter. And because this is a variable, I can feed that again from the outside so that it does proper cover imposition. So this is a good example of something that you can do with pages. I could first select the pages and then do an imposition with them afterwards. I'm going to show you something that does the first step now. So when I have a complete book, so here I have something that has, I believe, 25 pages in total. And when I run extracts, there, I now have a 4-page document. So I will have pages 1, 2, and then 24 and 25. Yeah. And in an automated workflow, of course, what I could do is say generate more than one page, more than one document. I generate one document for the cover with the pages that you see here. And then I can actually tell pdfToolbox to give me a second document with all the other pages. And it is really as flexible to be able to say all the other pages. So I don't have to worry about how many pages my document has. It will simply extract these four for the cover, and then the second document will hold whatever is left. I have some other examples that I could show where it does the same thing. As you can read here, keep page 5, 10, 15, 25. But I think you believe me, if I can extract a cover, that would be a possibility as well. And then one thing that I have not talked about, but that is often very important also in commercial print and digital print, is the generation of bleed. And I'm just going to show you one example. There are multiple ways in which bleed can be generated. And so let me show you one that does so by local stretching. Local stretching means that content is generated automatically for the bleed. And you can see that the content right at the trim box has been stretched a little bit to create the bleed that was necessary in this document, but was not included by the client. So when we talk about pages and we talk about setting the trim box and the bleed box correct, well, you can also add bleed on top of all of the other things that you are doing with that document. And then the last point is these proof sheets. And the idea of a proof sheet is that you take a file and you put it typically on a letter-sized document or A4 size document, and then you might add some job-specific information to it. And in some cases, that's just what you send to the client so that they can see what is going to be printed. In other cases, there is a need to have it signed or to use it in a system where it can be signed. pdfToolbox focuses on the creation of the proof sheet itself. How you then have that signed by the customer is business logic around it that pdfToolbox isn't that interested in. It really shows you or allows you to create this kind of setup. And then the question is how it does that. And I'm going to show you something that comes out of a label workflow in this case, but of course, whether it's a label or a business card or something else doesn't really matter. you'll see that this is one that also has a bunch of variables because it comes out of a workflow where it was integrated with an MIS system, and so it gets information from the MIS system. These are all the variables that it gets, and so I could change the number of labels per role. I could also change the material if I wanted to. Looks much better that way. And so when I run this, it uses, as I said before, it uses a combination of the Imposition engine in pdfToolbox, and that is mostly to place this preview on the right side and make sure that we have an A4 document as a result. And then it uses place contents to add a lot of the information on it. So you can see that it changed the material to what I entered. It should also have changed the number of labels per role to 5,000. That was another change I made in that variable. And some of the other things are calculated automatically. For example, the scaling here is calculated automatically. The number of color or the color patches that I have here are calculated automatically. pdfToolbox looks at what are the separations in this document, and then it gives me a list of color patches per separation. Yeah. So the place content engine that is used to create this proof sheet allows me to do these kinds of things. What place content, my place content template in this case also does is it looks at the type of winding, and the metadata is just a number. It says winding type 1. And the HTML template has, from that winding type 1, decided that it's going to show an image representing that particular winding type. So proof sheets are very, very flexible. In fact, what we typically do when we make these kinds of proof sheets for people is to just ask them, you know, make something in Illustrator, make something in InDesign, show us something that you are using today. And then we simply create an HTML template that implements that particular look and feel. Yeah. And what you can do there is very flexible. And to just show you that this is not a proof sheet that we've created. I mean, yes, it is a proof sheet that we've created, but to show you that there isn't just one type of proof sheet that you can create, but that it really is an HTML template that you can modify. I've taken the same document, and now I'm going to run a different process plan. The variables are also different. So let me just change something here as well. And then I can run that one, and you will see that in principle, this is similar to what you saw before. It has a preview. It's an A4 document with that preview. It has some additional metadata. You can see also that this one has color patches, but there are obviously also differences. This looks completely different than the first example. If you think that this looks kind of weird and this big white space that you have on the left top side is weird, that is correct, and that is because this particular proof sheet was created to be able to use in a white label workflow or for well, the print company that developed it themselves. And in the second case, there is a logo of that print company there. So that is also, whether or not there is a logo in the top left corner, is also a variable aspect of this proof template. So again, input document, place content engine is used with an HTML template that decides how all of this is going to look. And then you have this proof sheet that you can now use in the rest of your workflow. Okay, that is what I wanted to share.